I'd like to thank you all for attending this SMTA webinar. Today, our featured speaker is Stephanie Goetz from Goetz Communications, and she will be presenting Communicating with Impact and Developing Your Authentic Presence. Stephanie is an award-winning journalist, executive speaker coach, pilot, philanthropist, and professional trainer. This Emmy-nominated broadcaster anchored and reported more than 5,000 newscasts at NBC, CBS, and ABC affiliates over 10 years. She is the founder and owner of Goetz Communications, where she works with C-suite leaders, top executives, and all walks of life to develop communication skills, media training, brand influence, and speaker effectiveness in preparing them for engagements with any size audience. Her client list includes Fortune 500 companies like Microsoft, Nike, T-Mobile, Thomson Reuters, Northwestern Mutual, MasterCard, and more. Before we begin, I would like to read off the following copyright statement for you to consider. Applicable copyright laws protect all presentation materials. Any unauthorized use, duplication, or distribution is strictly prohibited. As for questions during this webinar, Stephanie welcomes and encourages any questions or interactions that you wish to submit via the chat feature. So please feel free to submit them at any time, and we will address them throughout the presentation. This webinar is scheduled for 60 minutes, but if there are more questions that go over the 60-minute mark, Stephanie is more than willing to stay on as long as needed to address those questions. So with that, I will pass it over to you, Stephanie, and we appreciate you being with us today. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you very much, Jacqueline. I appreciate the intro and appreciate you having me here today. Welcome, everyone. It's so good to see all of your names out there. I can't see all your faces, of course, but I'm really thrilled that you're all here. Very honored, and I hope that you'll get a lot out of today to really help you elevate your communication, elevate how you interact, and hopefully that ultimately elevates your business and your work going forward. Now, I want this to be interactive. I don't want it just to be me speaking to you the whole time. That would be fine, but it's much more interesting when I can get a little bit of interaction, especially because we might learn a little bit from you, or there might be pieces that you need to touch on or you want to hear about that I don't touch on. So everyone's probably used the Zoom group chat before. At the bottom of your screen, you can click chat and then type in a question. What I would really love to get a little bit of a sense of to start here is where what's the whole spectrum of where people work and what they do. And so if you feel comfortable, you can even just type your first name, or you don't even have to type your name if you don't want. But I'd just like to get a sense of where you work and what you do. So what position that you're in at your company and where you work. So please type that in so I can start getting a list of that to get a better sense. And thank you for the welcome. Appreciate it, Carly. But then throughout this entire time here, these 60+ minutes that we have, ask questions, type them in the group chat, and we're going to try to get to as many of them as we can as we move forward. So we want to make this most valuable for you as we can. So I see we have an engineer at John Deere. Thank you very much. And we'll start to see more of those coming in. So overall on communication, why is it so important? Well, it's one of the first things that people see and hear about your company or you, and whether they can trust you, whether they want to build a relationship with you, and whether they want to work with you. And oftentimes we put so much on this, the hard skills, if you will, the learning, the trainings that you need to have for your work. But without the ability to communicate what you're doing and the opportunity that the customer or the client or your team has with what you're pushing forward, it's going to get lost in the shuffle, and it's actually going to cause more issues or more distress or anything within the company more if you're not able to communicate that effectively. So I see that there's a lot of people. Thank you so much for your info where you work. We've got manufacturing engineer, supervisor, quality engineer, directors, sales managers, of course, all in the technology industry, which is a very challenging industry at times to communicate because it can be very, very, very complex. But if you think about the message that you want to get across and how do you effectively communicate with people, ultimately, we're all here on the same page, wanting to have communication that is clear. And so I always start people with this. If you're thinking about how am I supposed to communicate? What am I supposed to say? Think first and foremost of how would you want to be spoken to? Would you want it to be very heavy in detail and get lost in the weeds? Or would you want that same detail interesting, direct, to the point? Do you want a little bit more of the context? Do you want to have a little bit more of the roundness? But ultimately, if we think about how we want to be spoken to with the tone of voice, with the respect, and with something that's interesting, often that's going to translate with 99% of people. And so think about, first and foremost, maybe how you'd want to be spoken to. And if you're getting a little too deep in the weeds, or if you're saying things that really don't make sense, maybe to the vast majority of people, take a step back and go, is this something that I would understand if I was in their shoes? So when we think about speaking to, whether it's a presentation or whether it is just one-on-one or 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, there's basically 3 big buckets that we can fit our speaking into. It's first and foremost what you say, your message. Of course, that's very important. Secondly, it's how you say it, your clarity, your voice tone, your speed, your cadence, your timbre, all of that, of how you say it. And then lastly, it's how you come across, your presence. Now, these are not necessarily in order. These are 3 pieces that fit together ultimately to make great communication. So when we think about the first one of what you say, you have to know your audience. Before you can even truly craft a great message, you have to think about who you're talking to. And how many of you actually think of that right away? First and foremost, I have to know exactly who this person is, what they like, what they don't like, how they digest information, how they don't. Probably not always the case. What we are often focused on is our own message. And as important as that is, imagine if you were so focused on a message that was even in the wrong language as someone else, and we forgot to include that they don't actually understand that, or they can't understand us. That would be a very, very, very challenging communication situation. They wouldn't understand you. The same thing is if you're speaking with someone who maybe isn't as technically savvy, or if it's someone who is very tech savvy, who wants to know that detail. So think about who is this person, and how do they like and retain information? Are they a C-suite executive that you're talking about IT solutions to? Is this a fellow engineer and someone that you're helping install some of these solutions to their company? And then how do they like and retain information? Because every person who is very detailed is also nuanced in how they receive information, as well as executives. But you can get a little bit of that intel if you as you speak with them and as you speak with other people who are similar in that position, and you think about, okay, I had this interaction with this individual. Maybe it's an executive with a company, and they were wanting me to kind of get right to it and asking a lot of questions, but also really not wanting to focus on the detail. Well, maybe you stay more higher level. And so when you realize that, and realize that they have very little time and executives are very busy, that they might want to know more of the vision and the overall picture, and especially likely the cost and what this is going to cost to their company, maybe you can focus more on those pieces. Also, is this person that certainly understands the technological background, but not fully? You might want to speak to them in a different way. Could you speak to them like someone who's at a college level understanding of this, or even a high school understanding of this, and use it in a way that's colorful and clear? Now, as Jacqueline was so great at listing off some of the clients that I work with, when I work with executives at Microsoft, T-Mobile, Cisco, and elsewhere, it's interesting because still, as technically heavy and savvy as they all are, when they communicate, and when they are communicating with even each other within the company, as well as executives outside, they still are encouraged to use, and this is when I've walked them through my own training, is say it in a way that's going to be interesting and palpable for people to understand. So maybe not using the flowery, the language that is sometimes too inside baseball or like industry jargon. We often get caught in that, and we use acronyms that people don't even understand. I was working with a very high level company, about a medical device company, and I was working with their whole team, and they have thousands of acronyms for the company. And I asked them, so who all in here knows what this acronym actually means? Whether it's the SMA, TMB, AGB, whatever it is. And most everyone kept their hands down because they knew what this one acronym was, except for there were about 2 or 3 people that raised their hands. And one of which was their executive. They said, I've never heard this one. It's a new one, or they don't use that. And so we cannot assume that people know what we're talking about. And so if you want to be clear and you really want to be effective, if you're saying some sort of acronym or something that they might not understand, say it and then say what I mean by that is, or this, and explain it in one sentence and then move on. Being transparent, that's huge in as you communicate through this time as well. These next few points are more specifically, especially for everything that's going on in the world right now, and the challenges that can be faced with people's uncertainty of the future and the vital importance for communication. So being transparent is vital. And companies can no longer just sit back and not speak up and not communicate what's going on or their direction. And so being transparent is really important. And to your employees, to your team, that's even more important. Because in that time of even from Monday to Wednesday, with everything that's evolving and shifting so rapidly in our world right now, they could make up their own story about what might be going on. And you don't want to have that within your team. You want to have a clear understanding. And so with your team or even with your clients, that transparency is vital. Whether that is, if you have that relationship where you can send a text message to them, or you're on Teams, or you're on another platform, whether that's sending an email to make sure that they're updated, or whether it's a blanket statement that you need to put out each week or each month as to what's going on with the company. You really can't over communicate in this time, but you do want to be very, very purposeful on what you actually say. Is this adding value? And is this something that that they need to hear? So that communicate frequently is important. It certainly isn't communicate every day just to say something, but you want to be purposeful on what is that piece that I need to be talking about. Is it that you have new hours of operation that they need to know about? Is it that now you have new offerings and new services to provide? Now be very, very careful. No one likes to be sold to at all, not even outside of a pandemic or a crisis time. No one likes to be. So when you're communicating this, think about what is the value you can add and what's a genuine relationship you're trying to build with them. And when you do that, people will see it more from a place of authenticity and that, oh, they can truly benefit from this versus, hey, here's what we're selling, here's what we can offer, and don't you want this? Again, going back to how do you want to be spoken to and sold to? And then communicate with empathy and strength to provide solutions. In this time especially, having that moment and that pause of saying, I want to check in and see how you're doing. How's your company? How's your family? How's your team? How are you guys doing right now? That is going to go far further than you realize. And it can be coupled with, and it should be coupled with, the strength and the providing solutions or answers or something that you can. Because when you do that, what that creates is this trust and this piece of understanding and this empathy side, but you also have that strength of here's where we're going next, here's how I can help you, here's what you might need. So when you bring all of those pieces together, this really creates a very dynamic, strong, and trustworthy company, individual, and team. Now, I know I want to see if we have any questions. We don't have any so far, but please, if there are any questions, I'd love to take them. Anything that we just talked about, anything so far?
Yeah, we don't have any questions right now, but I do want to comment on your first point, Stephanie. I thought that was awesome and something great to think about, and the fact of that not everyone knows everything that everyone else is saying. So when you said the acronyms, I thought it was really good to think about because a lot of the people on this webinar positions. So I think making sure to break that down to everyone and really get the point across of what you're trying to say is important. So thanks for that.
No, I appreciate that, Jacqueline. Thank you. That piece is so big in companies where we often find the biggest divide within communication and then within companies is when we're talking like this. So you're assuming someone knows what you're saying, but they're here, or whatever direction it is, but they are not intersecting. And the reason can just be that they don't fully understand what you're talking about. You may have not said it clearly enough. And there's a great amount of research that shows that loss of productivity, loss of essentially then you're spending more and not as much revenue and all of that, center around when people have a misunderstanding. Now it goes as far to also say, think about if there's a misunderstanding where someone gets offended with what you say, or they get confused, or they're not happy with what you say, or that to them, whatever can even be rubbing it wrong that way. What happens then? Well, there's of course a lot of loss in productivity and understanding and just that togetherness. And so that then goes to another point of realizing how vitally important it is to follow up. If you have a conversation with someone that you think, I want to make sure that we are on the same page here, maybe you can just shoot a quick email and say, hey, were there any questions that you had? Or if it's something that you felt that there was certainly a rub in the conversation, take that moment to be proactive and say, I noticed that there was a little bit of pause from you, or that there may have been a little bit of, this didn't come out the right way. Can we have a quick conversation to chat more about this, or to make sure that we're on the same page here? Or even if you have to apologize, be the bigger person and truly do that. But where you want to be sitting is thinking about that audience of who they are, who are you speaking to, how can you communicate most effectively to them, and then what is that message that you're going to say to them. You should never, ever, ever assume that they know what you're talking about. I do a lot of instructing and teaching on flight training because I'm also a pilot. And so within there's a massive spectrum of people who are fighter pilots or have 20,000 hours down to the 100-hour, 200-hour, even 1,000-hour pilot who might not have that same understanding of what you're talking about. And so I have to figure out, am I speaking to them in more complex terms, or is this more very, very basic, almost elementary terms, because that's kind of where they're at. Not right, wrong, or otherwise. It's meeting them where they're at. And when in doubt, if you at all have any concern or like not really sure where they might be at their understanding, always err on the side of being more explanatory. Always err on the side of instead of thinking they have a PhD in this, think of maybe they have a high school degree in this, that they're very curious, very smart on it. But how can you give a little more explanation or just use it and use layman terms for them to understand? The other piece about that is when you use layman's terms, when you use terms that everyone uses, whether it's over happy hour or over dinner or over a regular conversation, people grasp onto it more easily. Why? Well, because you have a million different things that you're thinking about in the day. And that could be like, oh gosh, I got to go grab the dry cleaning, or what are we going to do for dinner? Or, oh yeah, I've got to make sure I follow up with that business leader. They have so many different things they're thinking about. And then if you say something they don't understand, or if you say it in a way that they don't understand, you're going to lose them for 3 or 4 or 5 seconds after, or maybe for the rest of that sentence that may have been really important. Using language that's easy to understand and using it that you would use on a daily basis, that's going to be the most effective. So we've covered all of this of what you say. Now it's how you say it. Think about, what is your desired outcome? What do you want to get out of this meeting? It could be a meeting with an executive to talk about the process, some of your implementation of some of your software, some of your solutions. Maybe it's that there's a problem and you have to address that. Those are not always easy, but the solution and the outcome, what is that? You want to move forward, that you need to make adjustments, that you need to cut the budget or add to the budget. But when you think about your outcome, when you think about your audience, the piece of really understanding around that is thinking about that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. To inquire, to listen, to ask relevant questions, to understand, not just to reply. That is going to take you far further than if you just assume that they know what you're talking about. So to your question, Jacqueline, especially about making sure people are on the same page, before you even go in to developing your message, that inquiring piece is important. You might have the ability to actually ask them questions during the meeting and really get some insight and some intel and the most important piece you need to. It also might be that the inquiry comes beforehand during research that you're doing, making some phone calls to get a better understanding of the company. Or the inquiry might be to some of your team and some emails and exchanges there. But you'd be surprised at how we often assume that people know what we're saying. But if we just ask them a question and dive in a little bit more, we will actually get a far different understanding. I can't tell you how many times I've asked my clients and someone that I've been working with to help them with their communication and help them with their presentation. And then I ask them, they may be like fearful of presenting. And I assume that it's maybe because they don't want to feel like they're judged, or they don't want to put themselves out there, or whatever else it might be. Well, I was working with a client once and I said, so tell me a little bit about, why you're struggling with public speaking, of the many, maybe different reasons. And this person said, it's because I was cut down big time by a boss once. And they said that they didn't really, basically, they were very condescending. They were very disrespectful. And they thought I was a terrible presenter. So I'm afraid to even do it because of that harsh feedback. So this had nothing to do with maybe just the fear in general of public speaking or knowing your message. It was one instance. If I hadn't asked that, I wouldn't have been able to effectively help them to be able to work through that problem and then help them be a great presenter. Ask and inquire as much as you possibly can. The more you can do that, the more that you can truly be most effective in your communication with them. And then secondly, you got to speak. So you've asked the questions, you kind of have a good basis of where you're going. Now it's speaking. How do we do that? There are many different ways, but if you're really trying to get your point across most effectively and breaking it down in terms and in concepts that people can understand, I encourage you to think about, if this were a news story, what's the headline? What's the most important thing that people want to walk away with? Is it that your solutions now are being converted to this different type and they're going to have to actually do more back-end help or some back-end hardware that they're going to have to? Or is it that there's something great that they can get rid of something that they're working on and it's more streamlined? Then what are the 1 or 2 or 3 things or the points below that you can give a little bit more detail to? Not 100, and your PowerPoint slides should not be more than like 10 or 15, because you're going to lose them if it's too much. And your outcome should always bring you back to, what is your headline? So what is the most important part of this meeting, of this information I need to give them, or this presentation? Use declarative language. Try not to wash it down with, we kind of sort of have an initiative that we might be working on. Really just be solid in what you're saying and move forward. And use short, direct sentences. Focus on 1 or 2 points as much as you can, whether that is maybe even, again, like I said, a few bullet points below that, but trying not to be so much in boiling the ocean so they don't understand it. Now, many of you also ask me many of the people that I work with will ask me, okay, I kind of am pretty good at identifying the headline or the main thing they want to get across and kind of declarative language, but I say and ah and well, and I don't know, I kind of do all of that a lot. The best way that you can rid yourself of ums and ahs and all of that, be okay with a pause. Be okay with silence. Likely they're not going to jump in right away, and they're not going to say that that they're going to ask another question or take you off base or take you in a different direction. Likely, if you have a pause and have a little bit of a break there, it allows it to sink in for the individual. Now, it's okay to say an or an ah every once in a while. But if you're constantly doing that, just be cognizant of it and see if instead you can be silent. Say nothing, and then go to the next piece. All right, I think we may have a question here. Let me check. All right, I've got a question here. And we see that in their company, they have staff meetings with different departments every single week. Some of them spend hours in those meetings and others, but some of them don't understand the technical language used. And so how can this person tell their boss without sounding like they don't know what they're talking about? Now, I'll come at both sides from that. It's a great question. Thank you for asking it. So if you're thinking, so I'm guessing where you're coming from is that you don't understand fully necessarily what maybe the department is talking about, because at times they use really complex language and maybe inside industry jargon. What I would do personally is I would have a conversation, if you're able, with your direct superior or with that boss or that individual, and say, talk about it more from the broader group. If you're feeling that way, guess what? Chances are there's one or two or maybe a dozen or more people that are also feeling that way. You could come to it, and you could even speak to those people first and see if they also are feeling that way. But maybe you can come to your boss or your supervisor and say, listen, we're trying to all get the most out of these meetings, and we're trying to get the most out of what's going on at the company. More so, we need to be most effective in our work, understanding what's going on. So I'm curious if there's a way that we can make what we're talking about and the technical stuff we're talking about, break it down a little bit so that everyone can understand it. Not everyone is an engineer. Not everyone is an IT professional. Not everyone has been in this industry like this. Some people are lawyers or accountants or sales folks that might not be on that same level. Some might. But I would encourage you to actually speak with them and also speak with those around you who may be feeling the same way. The challenge there is then, how do you get others to do that? Well, any sort of change, as many of you know, it starts from the top. When you start implementing change, it has to be bought in from your leaders and from then the executives directly below, and directly below that as it trickles down and is lived and breathed throughout the culture. So that piece about how do we communicate in a language that everyone can understand should start and will start so much from a few leaders taking that on and realizing what's the most important thing they need to do. Well, they need to speak in a language that everyone understands so that they can then be effective as a company to increase performance and revenue and everything. So speaking with them first and foremost would be most helpful, and then see if there's a way that they can start implementing much of that. Obviously, what I do when I work with companies is I work with their top executives, help them build a plan, help them, how do they execute this communication within their company to be most effective, and also to adjust to make it like bite-sized so people understand without talking down to them by any means, but saying it in a way that people understand and then creating more of that throughout. I hope that answers your question. Please follow up if you have another question. Okay. Let's keep rolling. Now, we inquire and we speak, and then we also got to be very cognizant of our vocal tone, our pace, our volume, how we say it. Because if our vocal tone and pace and everything is not on par with what we're actually saying and is not congruent with that, people are not going to trust you. When there is incongruency, as we'll talk about in a second, with your body language and facial expressions, people are not going to necessarily fully follow you or fully trust you. So if you can see me on your screen and even make it a little bit bigger, what I'll do is, if you need to make it a little bit bigger, there you go. So if I would say to you, cross my arms and go, oh, it's so good to see you, versus it's so good to see you. You see a difference there? Of course you do. It's a pretty blatant one, but if I cross my arms, or if I go, my tone of voice is, it's good to see you, or yeah, nice job, or yeah, that's okay. That tone of voice is going to trump anything that you have to say. So your tone, how you say it, and maybe it's with empathy, maybe it's with strength, maybe it's with joy and excitement and thrill and the opportunity that you have to share with them. That is so vitally important, because when those are incongruent, unfortunately, you're not going to have congruency then in your communication with them, but you're also not going to have the trust within that space as well. Now, Jacqueline, I don't know if I see a few questions there, but if there's anything else, let me know.
Yeah, I have one question here from Carly, but I think that it was already covered in one of the points that you mentioned. So yeah, which I see, but people may have submitted to you personally too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So go ahead. Did you have a question, you said?
Well, the one from Carly, she asked, what is the best way to communicate a lot of information without emailing a long paragraph?
Perfect. Yes. Thank you so much for asking. So one of the best ways you can do it is take it visually from either your phone or a desktop, and write out in the email. First of all, you got to think about what's the most important thing, and then what are like 3 bullet points tops if possible. And so instead of, the question here is, what is the best way to communicate a lot of virtual information without emailing a really long paragraph? Well, first of all, if you're reading a book, think about a book page opening and you just see a bunch of paragraphs. And let's say that there's really important vital information in the second paragraph, 25 words in, and in the fourth paragraph, 14 words in. How are you going to distinguish that? Now, imagine you see that same page and there's words bolded or italicized or underlined. I'm not a huge fan of massive bolding, italicized, and underlined in an email, but what I am a fan of is using it judiciously. And the more important thing is, I would encourage you to, instead of writing a big long paragraph, put it in an intro paragraph of like a sentence or two, and then say, here's what we talked about, and bullet point it out. It's so simple, but that's where what happens is your eyes can then group it together, and it's much, much easier for them to take in everything, and they can boom, 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 go through the bullet points. If there's something vitally important, maybe put it in bold, italicized at the bottom or the top or wherever you need it to go. But then you should also look at it on your cell phone. If you're writing a paragraph on a desktop that many of you probably have, like dual or even quadruple monitors, where the text can go all the way across the screen, across the room, that's going to be, maybe not seem like it's incredibly long, but on your phone, all of a sudden you're scrolling down like pages and pages and pages because it's a much smaller format. Plus, the individual might have their text much bigger, and that's even worse then, because then you're really scrolling through a really long email. So think about how you can edit that email and then how you can bullet point it out or even separate out the paragraphs. When in doubt, do not do just one big paragraph. Even do like an enter to go down and make them separate paragraphs. That way people can see what they should be focusing on and to know that this is a natural break in the conversation and in the point, and then they'll go to the next point from there. But the more that you can be clear and concise on that, the better. The second piece to that, you got to edit yourself. You have to. Do not just write an email and send it. I know we do that a lot, but take 2 more seconds to read it over and make sure there's no spelling errors or grammatical errors. But most importantly, if it doesn't need to be in there, take it out. Or if it needs to be changed a little bit for them to understand that better, that piece of information better, then please do that. So look over it, edit it, but also make it something that's palpable for people to understand. All right, well, someone had to drop off. Thanks for coming in. I appreciate you. Hope you can catch the rest of this. Keep the questions coming in. We definitely want to make sure that we get to your questions as they come. I don't know if there's anything else, Jacqueline, but we'll keep moving if so.
Yeah, no, I think that these are great and really digestible points. So I would say moving along is great. Thanks.
All right. Okay. So we have our inquiring and speaking in voice. So that's how you say it and how you get your point across as best you can. And then it's how you come across. Presence. What is this and why does it matter? So the presence that we're talking about here is the presence that you have as you walk into a room, or the presence that you have as you walk into a Zoom meeting or WebEx or anything else. It's your charisma, it's how you come across, it's how you make people feel. And this is actually one of the most important portions of communication, because it's the first impression that people have of you. It's also the first assessment or judgments that they have of who you are, if they're going to trust you, if they're going to work with you. So presence is very important, but we don't always place an immense amount of time on how do we refine that. Now, presence is something that can be identified, refined, honed, and made your authentic presence. And it's not just like, that person that just walks in the room and lights it up, and it makes you feel like that you are the only person in the room, or that you just want to go and talk to that person, you're very drawn to them. Or if it's someone who you really are kind of pushed away from and kind of go, I might not want to go over to that person, or they might be closed off. Those are all presence and how we come across that say volumes before we even speak to someone. So why does it matter? In a survey done of CIOs, of employees to their CIOs and how they perceived them, it was done by Gartner several years ago on all of the top leadership traits that they found of CIOs. So let's say they did a study of asking a bunch of employees and professionals on how they saw their executives, and then what are those top 20 leadership traits that make a difference. Number 1 was business acumen. Number 2 on the top 20 leadership traits that make a difference was their presence. It wasn't technology skills that was ranked 12th. It wasn't organizational skills that was ranked further down. It wasn't strategy. I mean, presence was huge. And of course, the business acumen and the strategy and the vision all are vitally important and the most for a company. But what they found is that if you're not communicating it effectively and you also don't have the presence to go along with that, people will not trust you. They won't buy in. They won't follow you. So for all the leaders out there, whether it's C-suite executives, whether it's managers, whether it's just leading a team of 2 or 3, what do you have to have of your employees and your staff? You have to have them following what you're saying to be able to be in this together as you move forward and as you are at the same goal. Now, those who didn't have great presence also ran the risk of not having their employees or staff or even clients really truly follow and buy into what they're saying because there was this disconnect. Also, for an executive or a CEO or a C-suite, how many times do you actually get to sit down one-on-one with your staff or with frontline staff? You don't. So all they have to go on is how you come across, your presence and your communication. And so if you're coming across closed off or bombastic or just all business all the time, you might think it might be effective, but people need more than just business all the time. They have to know that when there is change, especially in this time, that things are going to be okay. Or what is the direction that you're headed? Or are you able to make the tough decisions? Are you able to be compassionate? All of those pieces. And so the question then is it better to be loved or feared as a leader? I ask a lot of clients this and a lot of people that I work with. And there's a range of answers. Some say loved, some say feared. Some say it's a combination of both. And the research will actually show that is the dynamic duo if you truly want to be the most effective leader. When you have warmth and strength together, you have the ability to show people that the human side of you that connects with them, because at the end of the day, the human nature and the human connection piece is more powerful than nearly anything. But that you are a human, you can lead them, you can understand and empathize with them, you can also relate with them, while also being able to make the tough decisions, while also being strong, while also having clear strategy. Now, if we just have warmth alone, it might be great. You might have a great leader who is compassionate, understanding, kind, nice. But then what if you have too much warmth? What if it's just warmth? Do you think they'll be able to make the tough decisions, let people go that need to be gone? Will they be able to really force a strategy forward and really stand their ground? Maybe not. Now, if you just have strength, will be a great leader who is able to make those tough decisions, withstand the storms, will be able to really directionally move the company. But we all know likely a leader who's been too strong in our lives, a boss, even friends, significant other, or family. If there's too much strength, what happens is people put up a wall and people won't be receptive. Now, there has been schools and trains of thought over the year of just pushing forward and plowing forward and just getting it done. Now, that is important, and work ethic is the most, such a vitally important piece of of a professional's career, of course. But you can have it rounded out with understanding and compassion, because you do want the other person sitting across from you to be able to listen, to understand and hear where you're coming from. And a great body of research has shown that when we judge our leaders, we judge on this or assess, we assess on their likability and their strength. Because who wants to work with someone who you don't like to work with, who is someone who's bullheaded or stubborn or won't see your perspective to be able to move the company or your mission forward? You want to have someone who's going to be both of those, that's going to be able to be strong in their vision, but also open to other ideas. So when you have these two traits together and you lead or you start with warmth, that in fact is the key to influence. Now, a lot of people might say, like, leading with warmth or starting with warmth, that sounds weak, that sounds not strong. But I challenge that, and the research also challenges that, because what it shows is that Warmth doesn't come from a place of insecurity. It comes from a place of strength within you, that you know who you are, you know where you're going, and you also know that everyone else is on their own journey too. And how can you meet them there and understand them? Frankly, you might learn something about them or their company that actually helps propel you and them together in a way that you wouldn't have, because you were open to listening, and you're able to move forward more effectively. The interesting thing about this research done by Harvard, Princeton, Lawrence University, a lot of it's done by a woman, wonderful researcher named Amy Cuddy, who's written a book called Presence, and she also has a TED Talk that's one of the most watched TED Talks. Her name is Amy Cuddy, and it's all about how our presence and our ability to stand taller and our ability to have that confidence also changes and affects the way that our body perceives it. So when we stand taller and when we feel more confident, our body then in turn releases hormones that have more of that confidence piece in us, and vice versa. So we keep this great feeling going, these high power poses. So the key here, though, that she's talking about with leading and starting with warmth is that when we lead and when we start a conversation with warmth, even if it's a tough negotiation, even if it's that 90% of the conversation is going to be strength, can you add that 10% of warmth, where it's a warm smile, it's a handshake when we can shake hands again, it's a asking them how they're doing, and meeting them where that they're at. That's where that warmth really lies. And also what happens there, trust is built. So to influence, there has to be trust. But to build trust, they have found you lead more with and start more with warmth versus just your skills, your competency, or even the mission at hand. So I would encourage all of you out there right now to kind of give an assessment of yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being not so much, 1 being you're really, really great at it. Are you more of a strength or a warmth person? Or maybe just looking at where are you with warmth? On a scale of 1 to 5, would you say that you're doing really great at this? Or would you say that I need to bring more of this in? On the strength side, on a scale of 1 to 5, would you say 1, oh, really, I feel like I'm always just folding under pressure? Or would you say I'm fantastic at this, and it's actually almost getting to be on the end of too much? That assessment is really helpful for you, because then you can look at where can I bring in more strength potentially in what I do? Where can I bring in more warmth and understanding? And again, it's so different depending on the different conversations that you have and the different situations and settings that you're in. It might be that it's 80% warmth and 20% strength, or that in the same sentence you have warmth and strength together. But I think you're getting the idea of the power that you have when you create a connection and when you create understanding. So what does this look like in individuals? Some of you might be saying, oh, I think that warmth is too soft and cuddly, or maybe strength is too much. Well, I'd like to give you a few examples. So one great example I love to use is Richard Branson. He's one of the most successful and wealthy business folks in the world, but he has an incredible warmth about him that has made him very, very successful. Of course, adventure and fun and loves play, lots of that. But he really believes in a culture of building up people within his company and actually hiring even more within when possible, even versus bringing in someone from the outside. He believes that even in some of his lawsuit earnings, he's been known to give some of that to his spread it within the company. But one of my favorite quotes of his is, spend more time smiling than frowning and more time praising than criticizing. You have an unlimited bucket of compliments. I learned this from a very, very, very highly successful executive who he is now a governor. And he said, I have an unlimited barrel and big bucket of compliments that I can give, genuine praise to my employees. And you know what that does? It creates a sense of worth. It creates a sense of appreciation, and that they'll go the extra mile for you. And it has to be genuine, most certainly. But when we do those sorts of things, we create that connection, and you're showing them a little piece of themselves that they might not see. So if you have a team member who's really struggling or maybe negative, are there things that you can show them of themselves that are actually far more far more effective and beautiful in themselves than they even realized. Whether it's, gosh, they're so fantastic at organizing this team meeting. They have done an incredible job at bringing in that strong business that will last long. Great job with your client interactions. Great job in this report and getting it done so quickly. That goes so far. Because if we go back to how we want to be spoken to, isn't it nice to know that we're doing a good job? It usually is. Another example is Sheryl Sandberg, from Facebook. You know, people have their varying opinions of her or how she's handled things. But at the end of the day, she has truly been on a mission to bring in empathy and understanding to companies, especially for those who are really struggling with people who have, you know, in this time of grief or loss or confusion, how can we meet people where they're at and have that more of that understanding? And she certainly has had to withstand some strong challenges over the years, as well as Mr. Branson and others, but they have been able to withstand those storms with a human heart. Another one that I find most effective and have been able to kind of see firsthand is the wonderful CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella. Now, he is their third CEO in the company's history, and this man has definitely taken their earnings through the roof over the last 4 or 5 years. So his ability to transform the company has been exponential. He's been incredibly effective there, but a couple of pieces where he's really been most effective is at the company. He's built in this encouraging their staff and their employees to live by the growth mindset, even read the book mindset of how to be more, how can we move forward together? How can we have an open mind on things versus this is the way it has been and this is how it's going to be sort of attitude. He has also believed that empathy is truly going to be their determining factor of how their products and services will differentiate themselves going forward. But has he had to respond to shareholders? Has he had to respond to the earnings and or lack of at times? Of course he has. But he has built it on a foundation of moving forward in a way together and with empathy and understanding. Christine Lagarde she used to be at the International Monetary Fund. She's now the president of the European Central Bank. An incredible woman who has wit and humor, who's also very, very strong in her decisions. And then lastly, Tony Dungy, one of the best, greatest coaches, or a very great coach from the NFL, who has had, I think, 2 Super Bowl championships, and an incredible coach who believed much more in the coaching that wasn't yelling and screaming at the players, but treating them with respect and understanding and speaking in a tone of voice and a volume that they would respect and understand. And that man has really gone on to really do incredible, incredible things with bringing both of those pieces in. So I encourage you to think about, where are you on that strength and warmth scale? Where can you bring more of either of them in? And then if you have a leader that you can think of, whether it's in your company or whether it's worldwide, or someone that you admire or can emulate, I would really encourage you to start finding those that you can kind of take some pieces off of and say, I love how they did this. I want to do more of this in a good way to be more effective in my communication and in my leading my company and leading my teams. Okay, so we do have a question here. And the question is, what rule of thumb do you use for the max number of points and smallest font when presenting with a slide? Well, it's kind of like a bumper sticker. They're like, you know, the bumper stickers are like, if you're too close to read, if you're so close you can read this, you're too close. Meaning if you're so far away, like let's say you're sitting in a room and the PowerPoint text is like this big because you're trying to fit everything in there. If it's that much and you have to squint to read it, it's too much. Now, I would never use I would really encourage you to stay away from like 10 to 15 point font. It's so small. But I wouldn't go more so on the rule of thumb of that. I would more so go, think about the last PowerPoint that you heard, watched, were a part of, or created, that you remember every single slide from beginning to end. Or tell me a PowerPoint that you even remember a slide in that you were watching someone else give. Now, you may remember 1 or 2 slides, but often when I ask that, people go, oh my gosh, I don't even remember like any of the slides at all. And I said, well, what were the points? And they can list off 3 or 4 or 5 points that they remember. So don't forget that your face and your communication that is what people are going to remember more. What they're going to remember are the points that you made, are the things that you said. They're not going to remember all the details of a slide. Now, on the slides, what they should be is a complete supplement to what you're saying. They should not be your be-all, end-all. Now, let's go back to my slides quickly. Now, in these slides, look at how many points that I have. So if we go all the way back, do you see how even on slides, so, you know, I've got a handful of words here. This is about the most that I'd want on a slide when possible. And even here, that's getting to be almost a good amount, almost a little much. Now, I realize that you have very, very, very technical things that you're trying to get across. But more importantly, what it should be is see if you can use visuals when possible. And then the text should be bullet points. It should be paraphrasing. It shouldn't be writing out the exact every single word to what needs to be said, because that's where you're going to come in. That's why you're presenting. That's where you should bring in the explanation of it to round it out. I would encourage all of you, and I work with a lot of companies, one of which specifically I was working with recently that does medical devices, and I was looking at their slides, and I was just sitting there going, the font is so small, it's so hard to see, I'm not able to understand what you're talking about, and they were getting in the weeds too much. And I stepped back and I said, all right, I'm going to force you to take out at least a quarter, if not more, of the content on here, and just do it and see what happens. And guess what? They were still able to explain their points. The slide looked fantastic, and your eyes weren't wandering everywhere. The other piece of that is when you bring in a slide, see if you can bring in the animations of where the different pieces are going to come in. So if you have text that you've seen it on mine and you all use it likely, if there's a point that you want to make, and that's just going to be the first piece that you want them to see, make that the first piece. Don't just put the whole slide up, because you're guiding everyone's vision to, okay, what point, where am I going to look at on the slide? Then, okay, when you're finished with that, let the next piece come up. If you just put all of it up there, it's way too much. It goes back to not only how you want to be spoken to, but how do you want to receive a PowerPoint? If you're going through this PowerPoint and you're like, if I was sitting on the outside looking at this, would you actually understand it? And would you feel like it was too much or too little? Then you need to assess from there. So definitely, when in doubt, edit, because you're going to be the rounding out piece of explaining what your slide is. It's not going to always be the slide. Now, I know there are some times where it's a slide that is a training slide that they need to have all the points that you need to share with them. I'd encourage you too, is there like a different slide deck they can have that has all of the very detailed points that they can take home with them, but the presentation slide is a little more edited and a little more palpable for people to understand. So I have a couple of other questions here that we'll dive into. So, and I will, okay, good. I'm glad that you appreciated, Kevin, thanks for the feedback on the great insight about the PowerPoint slide. Yeah, just be cognizant of what makes a powerful PowerPoint slide. Another side note I want to say to that is, if you're using lots of graphs of growth or of where the company is or product or whatever it is that you're showing, graphs or pie charts, those things are helpful because they're visual. Now, what if you could use things in a different way as well? Use all of your resources. So I was working with a company once where the sales folks had to provide information about where they were from last year to this year as far as the sales. So over the year, they had increased sales revenue by $2 million. And now they could have done a graph that was like, last year, this much. Here, $2 million more. That's fine, we get that. But instead, they showed a picture of like this beautiful, elegant, modern $2 million house right on the water. And they said, this is how much we have increased our revenue over the last year. Now, it was interesting, and more so it was that people remembered that. And they remembered like, oh my gosh, that's a big amount that we've done over this last year or whatever. So think about if there are unique analogies or pictures or anything that you can do there to make it interesting and fun. At the end of the day, it doesn't have to be straight or boring, you know, as straightforward or boring. It can definitely be interesting and bring some life into it as much as possible. So I'll touch on a couple things here, and then I'll go into my last piece of the slide, and then we'll get you going if you need to. Practices on dealing with difficult personalities as a leader. That is an incredibly tough one that we could talk about, and I do full trainings just on that, about how to have courageous conversations, how to work with very difficult individuals. And on that one, as a leader, your first and foremost important thing is that you have to be able to figure out what is going on with your team, and how can you then move everyone forward. So is it that you're going to do like an anonymous questioning where you bring in someone from the outside who gets a pulse for what's going on at the company, or that what's going on with that team? It's as simple as you sitting down with your team and seeing what's going on. It's also making sure that if there is someone that truly is a difficult individual, what is going on with them? I would encourage you to sit down with them and have a very candid conversation that goes deeper than okay, how is work? How's everything? Are there things that are causing them to have more of a pause? Are there things in their personal life that's causing them far more stress that is getting exacerbated and shown at work and how they interact? Most of the time, the issue that they're having is probably not necessarily directly related to the situation. It's related to a culmination of other things. We all know that. We all go through that, where you have an issue at home or at work and you take it out on the opposite, at home or at work. And so I would encourage you to sit down with them and have a conversation with them, but then see how you can start to maybe help them, support them, develop, or then how you then can take care of yourself to let what they say or how they act not affect you. Whether that's kind of putting up an imaginary visual barrier between what they say and you say, of going, I'm not going to let that affect me. That is unfortunately something that they may have, their own struggles or issues right now with what's going on. They're taking it out on myself or our team, but we need to just set that aside and not let it affect us. But encouraging and supporting and truly getting to the bottom of it as much as you can, I think would be the most helpful thing that you can do when possible. All right, well, I'll quickly share a little bit here, and then if there are more questions, we have a couple minutes left, and there are, I'm happy to stay on this for another 15, 20 minutes if we need to, if there are more questions, but we can also let you go as well. So presence and influence. The most effective way to have great presence and influence is connect or have composure. Be cool and calm under pressure. If you have someone coming at you that's saying that's combative or something, be poised under pressure, relax. If you are in a situation that's causing a lot of stress, are there ways to de-stress and relax and take a breath and then move forward with a clear mind? But that poise under pressure, like great leaders are able to have that no matter what. Even think about great athletes poised under pressure and like the bottom of the ninth in a no-hitter or tie to the World Series. I mean, that is incredible poise under pressure. You can also have that if you take a step back, take a deep breath, and really have that confidence in what you're doing going forward. So confidence is a big one. When you have composure and confidence and the other pieces, it makes great presence. Now, confidence, body language, eye contact, authenticity, and being comfortable in your own skin. Confidence is unique to any individual, but I would say when you feel most confident, what is it? Is it when you're doing the work that you do best? Is it when you're in a certain outfit? Is it when you are helping people and supporting them? Channel that whenever you're in a place of where you're feeling insecure. Clear communication is another piece of presence and influence, as well as connection. So when you communicate effectively with confidence and having that composure, that creates great presence. But you can't have it without connection. So when you connect with people, ask them a question, know who you're talking to, maybe have a genuine compliment to really make them feel that relatability and that understanding and that appreciation. The more that you can bring all of these pieces in, the more that it will be very, very effective on everything you do to be an effective communicator, to be an effective leader, and to be effective in all ways. But there are things that can be learned and things you can take going forward. So I'd encourage you that if there are pieces that you learned here, take 1 or 2 or 3 things tops and work on them. And then if you have 5 things that you wanted to work on, only implement 1 or 2 or 3 at a time. You can't change a golf swing by changing all of it at once. If they tell you to do 5 different things, it's going to really mess up your swing. But if you focus on just moving the hips or just closing the club head, whatever those are in relations to your training and your developing your communication, that's going to be most effective, to really focus on a couple of pieces and solicit some feedback from outside. Even record yourself. If you have a presentation you want to give, or if you have a message you want to get across to someone, a conversation that you really need to practice, in your room or in your house, wherever you are, take your cell phone, hit record, and then record yourself doing it, and then watch it back. I know it sounds totally like gut-wrenching for most people, but if you look at it as it's like a respected colleague or someone that you respect versus yourself, you can see it and come at it with a clearer mind of being respectful of the constructive criticism that you give to yourself on that platform. So be kind to yourself if you record yourself and watch it back and say, oh, it was a little fast, or I keep doing those weird things with my arms or my face, or wow, I had a great message, awesome tone of voice, but maybe I can slow down a little bit. And then you practice and practice and practice. It's really the best data and information you can have to then start implementing that change as you go forward. Now, I know we're coming up on time here, a couple minutes after, but I'll hand it to you, Jacqueline. I'm going to look through some of the other questions. I'm not sure if we have more, but I'm happy to take any more questions from any of you. Don't be shy.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was amazing. Oh my goodness. That was very comprehensive and really good digestible points. So we appreciate it.
Okay.
As she mentioned, if you have any questions at this time, please feel free to submit them. I did want to make a point that I loved your exercise that you put on us to think about the warmth versus strength sides of ourselves. And I feel like that's something that I want to carry out to the people that I work with, as well as like even my friend group. Something good to think,
Yes.
reflect on yourself a little bit. So thanks for sharing.
Absolutely. All of these pieces can and should be used actually in your everyday interactions too. We all have pieces of ourselves that can be stronger or a little bit weaker that we can either build up or pull back on. And all these connection points and all the pieces that we've listed in here can absolutely be used to be effective in your relationships, your personal relationships, and of course your professional, but they can be used with your family and your friends and your loved ones. You can bullet out the most important things, the most important pieces that you want to say at the dinner table, and maybe have a little more warmth, or to be strong in what you're saying. So all these pieces can be used in all your interactions. So I've seen a lot of thanks here in the comments, and thanks everyone. I really, really appreciate it. I love doing this work, and I feel a very great joy and gift to be able to do it. One last thing that I will do here is, because you may have questions, you may have information that you didn't receive, or you felt that you had a little bit more question, or want to just follow up with something. Here's my information. You can reach me at goetzcom.com, and then my email, Stephanie@goetzcom with 2Ms.com. But just reach out if there's anything that you had further questions on, if there's anything that your company would like to discuss or talk about. This is at a time certainly where everyone can use more effective communication in all that they do, especially reaching out to clients, developing their business contacts, and developing their teams. So I'm happy to help in any way. You can certainly reach out anytime.
Thanks, Stephanie. I actually did just have one more question come in. Are you fine with answering a few more?
Of course. Yes.
Okay, cool. This question is asking for tips on managing your manager.
Okay. So tips on the person who asked that. Can you ask a follow? Can you be more detailed? What exactly are you asking on that? I'll go into it a little bit, but managing your manager. Well, it all depends on what kind of management the manager needs. So maybe have them follow up there with a little more detail, and then is there another question?
That's the only one that I have
Okay.
for, but
Okay.
You said tips for managing up, manage your manager, micromanaging, yeah.
Okay.
Take it in which any way you want.
Yep. So the most effective way to help everyone be on the same page is to start a dialogue. So I would encourage you to go, what are the things that are really frustrating you with what's going on? Make a list of that, not like all the bad things, but kind of what are the pain points that you're really struggling with at that time of maybe how the manager is being more of a manager versus a leader. But when you go to them, you cannot go to them by saying, you did this and you did this and this isn't working and if someone came to you like that, you'd put up a wall immediately. So see what those pieces are. If they're micromanaging a much, then I think it's your job to think about, well, what is your solution? If you don't want them to micromanage, but they do have to kind of oversee what's going on and have to make sure everyone's moving forward effectively and doing their job. What would that look like to you to be led versus managed? And so could that be that they don't have to check in with you as much? Could that be that you don't have to report every little detail of every sales call or every interaction that you have? But they are going to need something. If you're the leader, if you're the manager, you're going to need some information too from them. So that might look like, okay, maybe we could say we'll do a check-in point every week or every 2 weeks, or check in when there's something to update on this individual or this lead. That's where I would encourage you to sit, because you have to create some sort of solution that you think would work for you, but that is also going to work for them. And then I would encourage you to go to them, like sit down very honestly and say, this is how I most effectively work. I appreciate all of the attention that you're giving to us and the team, but where I thrive is having autonomy. And so not having to be checking in with my lead so much, because then I can just focus on the great work that I'm doing. So when you focus more on how you work and how it can be effective, and then some solutions from there, hopefully you'll be able to most effectively help them see if you can be on the same page. Now your manager, your leader, they might not be super receptive at first, but I think you might have to really be honest and say, listen, it is hard for me to be managed so closely, because it's taking away from the time for me to do X or to be effective at the company. Is there a way that we can come to a different level here? And there might be things that you can do. There might be things that are just protocols that you can't adjust. But have the conversation. When in doubt, have the conversation with them to be on the same page as much as possible.
Well, I think it's safe to say that you've inspired us all and you've provided us with really great information. So thank you again.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm so glad. You all have it in you. No one comes is born with the ability to just speak perfectly. Some have natural talent and some are very, very good at it. And some just, you go, wow, but they have honed it over the years. I honed mine over singing and performing and doing theater for years, but over 5,000 newscasts, I honed it. So I certainly did. And you can do the same thing, and it won't take you that much time at all, I guarantee you. But if you purposefully focus on this, just like you would the work that you do, the other parts of your work, you'd be really, really impressed to see how far and how great you can become. And then if you need a coach, if you need someone to even just do a couple of virtual sessions with you, there's always folks like myself and others who are out there who can jump on a phone, jump on the call and help you see the areas you might not see. But I would encourage you to really just start implementing some of this, because it's amazing to see what it does with your interactions with the people that you work with and the people, your clients and everyone.
Well, thank you again, Stephanie. We really appreciate it. And just a note to everyone, a survey will be sent out to you where we welcome any further attendee comments, suggestions, or any other input that you have. And that will be delivered to you via email. So please take a few minutes to complete it as it's valuable for both Stephanie and the SMTA. Again, Stephanie, like I've said many times, we really, really appreciate it. Your information was great and very helpful.
Wonderful.
So any feedback that you all have, or if you have any suggestion of future topics, please feel free to contact me. Stephanie, if you have any last words, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I love how many people have been on this webinar, but then so many people stayed till the very end. You don't know how much that means for folks who are trying to really help and support all the work that you're doing. So thank you, and I hope that this was helpful for you to be most effective in what you do. I love being able to help folks really break through any barriers that they have in communication and influence, and just to see you shine. So it's been an honor, and I wish you all the best of luck, and certainly be in touch if you need any further support.
Thank you. Thanks so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day, and hope to see you at the SMTA webinar. Bye.
All right. Bye.